So, today I want to talk about the climate crisis. I think it's something that a lot of people are aware of, whether esoterically or it's a real, tangible reality for them in their everyday lives. And the reason why I want to talk about the climate crisis, because I don't necessarily think that there is a misunderstanding about what it stands for and what people are actually essentially getting at when they refer to it. But I definitely think that there is a divergence in the understanding of who owns the climate crisis. What does accountability look like? So who's caused it, who profits from it, because there's always going to be somebody that's profiting. And who is it bringing down? Who's been left to drown, either literally or politically, by the climate crisis? I think essentially what I'm getting at is the climate crisis and climate change isn't just about science or carbon emissions. At its very core, it's about power. Who gets to pollute? Who gets compensated? And who gets heard? Welcome back to the Misinformation Podcast. My name is Z, also known as the Reluctant Accountant. And in this episode, I am asking who really owns the weather? So I think the best place to start is with some really hard truths. When we think about climate change and climate crisis, and when it's spoken about, it's often spoken about this in abstract terms. We need to reach X goal by X date in the future, otherwise X is going to happen. But the truth is, it's a very real and present reality for many people across the globe right now. For example, in 2023, we had the hottest year on record. The UK hit over 40 degrees for the first time in recorded history. Crops failed in Europe, and we had wildfires spread throughout Canada, California, and Greece. Millions were displaced in Pakistan and Bangladesh because of flooding, and Kenya and Somalia and Ethiopia have faced back-to-back droughts. And yet, despite all this, despite all the things that we see when oceans are burning, where California wildfires are ripping through and touching even the upper echelons of society, despite this, emissions are still rising. Oil companies are still drilling, and politicians are still approving new coal mines and licenses. And this, for me, as a child that grew up in the era that I did, when we all needed to come together and close the hole in the ozone layer, feels ridiculous. It feels surreal in some ways, because I remember the campaigns about CFC gases and this whole looming threat that we all took very seriously. So to see some of the kind of blasé attitudes towards climate change now, it just beggars belief. And here's something that we don't talk about enough. The climate change and the climate crisis isn't just caused by humanity. It's caused by specific people, corporations, governments, and industries who are still making money from it. So who's still profiting? Because that's what's happening. Essentially, whenever you look at anything in society, especially if it's policy that affects people, there will be somebody that's profiting. Somebody, some person, some organization, some corporation, some government, whatever it is, there will be someone that's benefiting. And even in the midst of COVID, we saw the same thing. There were people that decided not to waste the opportunity in the crisis to accumulate more wealth than they possibly already had, and probably than they already needed. And this is what we always have to look through things through this paradigm, because it's very rare in a society that's built and that's structured on the belief that the hoarding or the amassing of capital is the most earnest thing that you can strive for. It's very rare that you're going to have somebody say, I'm just going to do this for the greater good of people. If they are people that have thoroughly bought into the system, in which we're all participants, it's unlikely they're going to just say, in the goodness of my heart, I'm going to step outside the bound lines, the gold lines of what this society is set up to be. If you have this, if you live in a society, and we live in a world where capitalism is the operating ideology that everyone is supposed to subscribe to, in a society whereby the hoarding and amassing of wealth is seen as a positive thing by many, and it's very much lauded, and once you manage to do that, despite the exploitation of the masses, you are then given this power over those masses that you had to exploit in the first place to achieve your status. And so despite that, sometimes I believe that people think that decisions that are made by politicians or, other government institutions or just, individual corporations and people leading those corporations, they are just done in a vacuum. They are done without thought to how to maintain this pursuit of wealth, this pursuit of capital, this pursuit of profitability. And so if we then shift that back in, so if we don't extract that from the decision-making process, but actually look through things with this perspective, if we look through the decisions that are taken with the perspective of who is benefiting, then we start to see who the real villains are. So in 2022 and 2023, Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, and Chevron all posted record profits, tens of billions. Shell alone made over £32 billion in 2022. That's their highest ever. And yes, they paid some windfall tax, but they also got massive investment relief and tax breaks, some of it from the UK government. Meanwhile, fossil fuel subsidies globally topped £7 trillion in 2022, according to the IMF. That's money that easily could have gone to renewable energy or insulating homes or building resilient infrastructure, for example. But instead, what it's doing is propping up an industry that we actually know is killing people. And the worst part is the companies knew decades ago. Here's something that people don't tell you. BP and Shell both funded internal climate science back in the 1980s and ignored it. Just like, big tobacco denied cancer, just like big tech pretended that Facebook wasn't radicalizing people. This is manufactured ignorance, and we're all paying for it. So we know who some of the villains are, but let's look at the flip side. Who's suffering? Who's paying the price for this? Because it's not the fossil fuel CEOs, and it's often not the countries that caused most of the emissions. It's people in the global south, but also poor communities everywhere. So to be clear, the UK, for example, has contributed about 3 to 4% of all historic CO2 emissions. The US, over 25%. So Africa, the continent as a whole, less than 4%. And that's the thing. The floods, the droughts, the heat waves, they're not hitting those countries that are making the most emissions. They're hitting countries that didn't really cause this. And I think there's this idea, because the most drastic impact is felt by people in the global south, that those in the West and other countries that are producing these emissions are completely immune, which just isn't true. If you take the UK, for example, it is the poorest households that live in the leakiest, coldest of homes that aren't insulated. It would be the working class neighbourhoods that have the fewest amounts of green space. It's racialised communities that live near motorways, for example, or waste sites and incinerators. This isn't just global inequality, it's environmental racism. So when disasters hit, they hit unevenly, and the pace of recovery is much slower for those with the least. So with everything in capitalism, what do they teach you is follow the money. So what happens? At every international climate summit, rich countries promise climate aid. At COP15 in 2009, they pledged $100 billion a year, $100 billion a year to help poorer nations. And guess what? They've never met that target. Meanwhile, countries like Mozambique and Pakistan are hit by devastating floods and expected to still pay their IMF loans on time. This isn't aid, it's neocolonialism in a green disguise. And then there's the greenwashing, for example. You may have heard about this, not sure what it is. Well, essentially, it's when people describe their products in a way that makes it seem as though they're environmentally friendly or they're sustainable, when in fact they're not. Big banks, for example, will claim to be sustainable while financing new oil projects. Fashion brands will sometimes push these eco lines, but then they're burning their unsold merchandise. And then there's got airlines that will promote these carbon offsetting as though you can just plant your way out of pollution or something. It's just theatre, it's smoke and mirrors, it's branding, and it's buying time for people who already have it. So where does the UK sit in all of this? And the thing is, in the UK, we like to think of ourselves as climate leaders. We hosted COP26 in Glasgow. We've passed laws to reach net zero by 2050. And then we banned new petrol cars from 2035. And yet the government has approved new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. They're planning new coal mines in Cumbria. And they cut subsidies for solar, insulation, and onshore wind. And this is the thing as well. We talk about this like just transition, like a fair transition to renewables, right? But then energy bills skyrocket at the same time. Companies like Shell pay huge dividends to their shareholders. We say we want to help the world, but then we slash overseas climate aid. We can't talk about net zero without talking about who benefits and who bears the cost. I want to talk about reform, not because I want to give them more airtime or more platform, but because a lot of the time, if I do lives or I do lives on social media, I will have people talking about, well, reform's going to solve that. Reform's got the answer for that. So I want to speak about reform specifically in terms of their approach to climate change. And it's an interesting one because they often position themselves as this kind of party of the people. Farage, this millionaire, often speaks about, how whether Keir Starmer, whoever, needs to connect more with working people, because essentially for him, working people is like, as long as I put a flat cap on with my barber jacket and go down the pub and drink pints or whatever, that's connecting with the working people. And the reality is, it's just show. It's just a performance. And this idea that we can't transition to net zero or we can't transition to a more sustainable country because it's going to cost too much or it's too much interference, as though it's going to harm working people. Well, actually, the opposite is not transitioning is a great harm to people. It's a very interesting one. So I'm going to speak about that briefly. So, according to Greenpeace UK, Reform UK's manifesto, titled Our Contract with You, proposes to scrap the UK's net zero target, and Greenpeace say this is the greatest act of negligence. They want to increase oil and gas drilling, particularly in the North Sea, fast-track licenses for shale gas and nuclear energy, roll back environmental protections, including those for nature and biodiversity, and dismantle renewable energy subsidies, hindering the growth of clean energy sectors. So Nigel Farage said that his first day in office, if he becomes Prime Minister, is that he's going to dismantle the UK's net zero regulations. The thing about it is Reform's UK policies, they don't just threaten environmental progress, they also risk exacerbating social inequalities. By prioritising fossil fuels and undermining renewable energy and the renewable energy initiatives, these policies essentially will likely lead to increased pollution, higher energy costs, and greater health risks for the most vulnerable people in society. The very same people that Nigel Farage claims he's the man of, he's the people working for. And to kind of highlight that, if you look at, I think he's the MP for Clacton or whatever, Clacton on Sea, mind you. If any community would require some sort of kind of protection, it's communities that live by the sea. And so him positioning this crusade as though, it's too much of a burden. Who is it a burden for? Who's it going to be a burden for? And that's the thing that I think we often don't think about in terms of climate change. It isn't simply a case of people making, catastrophizing because they want to inconvenience others. It isn't just a case of, I'm going to be against these Just Stop Oil protesters because they may make some hypothetical person on the way to a hypothetical hospital late for a hypothetical meeting or appointment. Those things are true. That could happen. But those things happen every day anyway. They happen every day. We have so many delays in our transportation system every single day. And this is the thing that I think we often lose sight of when we are looking at particularly environmental activists. I see a lot of comments on social media, often berating, just stop oil protesters, and celebrating the incarceration and the harsh penalties that they face when they conduct their activism, when they're going out and they're doing their demonstrations and, maybe attacking corporate properties and such. And people celebrate. They celebrate the kind of really harsh penalties, like good. They shouldn't do that. And it's just interesting because these are the same people I see sometimes commenting on that, are the same people that will, have families that live in communities that are directly affected by climate change, directly affected. Or they will live in communities within the UK that are also affected by these changes in climate. They will live in communities, for example, where maybe the housing stock is very badly insulated. I think the statistics are that about 40% of UK properties are poorly insulated. And so people are cold. We want to play the political game when we're talking about the winter fuel allowance. And there'll be politicians that come and this is outrageous. How dare the Labour government take away this winter fuel allowance? It's not necessarily a position I disagree with. But what I find interesting is some of those politicians that are saying we would never take away this winter fuel allowance aren't stepping back to question why a winter fuel allowance is needed. Is it because energy prices are very high? Why are energy prices so high? Is it because the housing stock that we have in this country is badly insulated? Why is it poorly insulated? So we have this situation where politicians are very keen to keep you as myopic as possible, to keep you as short-sighted as possible. So you're only looking about what's just in front of you. Don't look too far in the future. Just look about what's just in front of you, and let's argue about that and make no long-term plans for our future and for the future of our children and our children's children. So back to the question of who owns the weather. I think we can probably safely say that the companies that profit from carbon, the governments that protect them, and the rest of us are left picking up the bill, whether that's in literal terms and, thinking about our increased bills, or whether that's in other ways where we're bearing the brunt of the impact and these changes that are taking place. It can be floods, it can be fires, food prices, whatever it is. But it doesn't have to be this way. So what if climate justice wasn't just about emissions, but it was about equity? How about wealth redistribution or political accountability? And recognizing who's been holding up the sky all along. The climate isn't collapsing because we boiled too many kettles. The climate is collapsing because power protects profit, not people. And until that changes, the forecast remains broken. Well, that's all I've got time for today. Thank you for joining me. I will be back again next week. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to leave a comment. And if you would like to connect with me in the meantime, I'm on social media. I'm on TikTok at The Reluctant Accountant, and the same handle at The Reluctant Accountant on Instagram. If you are listening to this as an audio, you can catch the video of it on YouTube at The Reluctant Accountant. But in the meantime, stay safe and I'll see you next time.